Hey, Instagram peeps, am I on the side for you? Am I sideways for you? I feel like it's possible that I'm sideways. Am I sideways, Instagram peeps? Let me know. Or can you see me like, it's possible that I'm sideways over there on Instagram. Sorry. With my phone in a specific way. Let me see. Is that better? That's probably better, isn't it? But then, uh, okay, now I'm. Sorry, Instagram. Gonna be sideways today. So, sorry. Hopefully, hopefully that's not too annoying. You're welcome. You are welcome. Woo! It's Monday morning. Monday, Monday. La 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 la. Am I sideways, Instagram? Oh well. Hey, it's Monday. So these are some live office hours coming to you live because they're live. Woo! I haven't had coffee yet today. So, but I'm not responsible for anything that comes out of my face right now, out of my brain. Not responsible. Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit today. Oh, yeah, sideways, but sure, no harm. Thanks. No harm done, right? No harm done. Just sideways today. I'll remember that I'm sideways. Wait, what does this do? Oh no, that just turns the camera around, so that's not really what we're going for. Yeah, I apologize. I had to finagle a thing, and this is how I ended up finagling. Oops. Hey, so my name is Dr. Shannon Coates, and I'm here coming to you live, doing some live office hours. I'm up here north of Toronto. And I develop resources for voice teachers and work in mentored situations with voice teachers so that voice teachers can teach even better than they already do and break down some, concepts and make sure that we're all kind of on the same page in terms of what's happening in the voice. So yeah, that's what I do. Okay. Yesterday was Halloween. Today is All Saints Day, right? Or something like that. In where I am, anyway. I think it's also Day of the Dead. But I don't know anything about that, so there we go. So if it's Day of the Dead for you, then that's wicked cool, and I wish I knew more. I do not. And Halloween was yesterday, and so what I put up on some of the socials was just like, when you first started teaching, what was something that really scared you? And the responses, oh my heart, so many responses. Like, so I, rather than, I was like, and I'll talk about the best one, how I was going to judge what the best one was. I have no idea. We'll talk about the best one in my live office hours, but I'm just going to talk through a few of them, right? So like a few things that came up over and over that people were talking about when they first started to teach. One thing that came over and over that people said in a bunch of different ways was that kind of like that scary thing about not knowing whether you're going to know the thing, whether and which comes down to, I mean, yeah, we can call it imposter syndrome about like, I shouldn't be doing this because I don't have all the information and I'm, blah, 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 or maybe I don't have the training, or maybe I didn't do a degree, or whatever all of that, in your brain might be saying to you. But it can be imposter syndrome, but, often imposter syndrome comes from a really, can often come from this real place of just wanting to do the best by our students. We just want to do the best by them. And so some of the other things that people said, I wrote a few down here, but some were like, I won't know what to say. Like, I won't have anything to say to them in a lesson. Boop. oh, I might hurt somebody, right? Like there were a lot of people who said, like I was really afraid when I first started teaching that I was going to cause damage. And so that's again, this like feeling, wanting to do the best by our students. And some folks talked about, yeah, not knowing enough, not knowing, being afraid that I won't have anything to say in a lesson, being afraid that I won't be able to fix what's happening in the singer, or being able to, being afraid that I won't hear what's happening in the singer, and so then I won't be able to give the right exercise. There are lots of folks talking about like there were so many exercises and so many things that you can do, and like how do I know when to use which exercise for what, And again, so many of these just come out of this desire to do right by the student, and that's not a bad thing. The desire to do right by the student. A couple of the other things that people talked about, and I want to come back to that main one in just a minute in terms of practical application. But a couple of the other ones, one that struck me that I had never, and that I still don't really think I've ever thought about, but the fear that I won't be able to be present with the student for an entire hour. So that one never crossed my mind, that you could tell what kind of person I am, because that never crossed my mind that I wouldn't be present with the student. But that is a legitimate fear. I mean, that's a legitimate, something where you think, okay, and again, that comes out of wanting to do the best by your students, right? That comes out of this desire to do right by your students, and the fear that you may not be able to be like fully engaged for that full hour and present, which I thought was genius. One that spoke to my heart, really spoke to my heart, was the fear that, especially when you're working with someone who is an accomplished pianist in their own right or has excellent piano skills, when you're working with someone like that you're not going to be able to, you won't have the skills to be able to accompany them well, or you won't have the skills to be able to like play what they need. And that was a real fear for me in some ways. I mean, not in the like, never going to be able to do this way, but for me it was more in the like, it's kind of exciting, let's try to figure this out, how I can make this work way, because that's kind of the way that my brain works, where I recognize that my piano skills are not amazing, but I may be working with folks who are amazing pianists, but there are lots of ways around that one. There are lots of ways. So if you're a beginning teacher and that's one of your fears, let me just say there are lots of ways around that one. And having excellent piano skills can be a real bonus, but there are also some things that can be a real negative about having excellent piano skills. So, okay, let me just throw this in here while I'm on this little pathway. So I have worked with lots of teachers where the first thing that I say to them is, you've got to stop playing piano. You've got to stop playing. You can't play. You've got to teach, like, your next 20 minutes of teaching, you're not allowed to touch the piano except to give a pitch. Like, you're just not allowed. Because their piano skills were taking over, and their playing was taking over their ability to be present with the student in their student's voice. The piano skills were taking, like, they weren't able to use their eyes to observe. They weren't using their ears to listen. They weren't using their body to feel what was happening with the voice, right? So with the singer, so they weren't doing full observations of what was happening with the singer. So like because they were so engrossed in that piano. And sometimes when you're not a great piano player, you can have the same problem because you're so like in the piano. But sometimes when you're not a great piano player, you just say, screw it, and you just do what you can because you focus on what's happening in the right. So you just like, no one expects me to be great at this anyway, so I'm just gonna screw it, right? So there can be a negative to being so engrossed in the piano work that you lose your engagement with the singer. And on Instagram, Elizabeth, seriously, going to Zoom changed my ears exactly. I can't believe I played so much in person. It's so true, right? I think it changed for a lot of people. I think that I do remember at the beginning of the pandemic when I was working with some voice teachers then as well about transitioning into online lessons, and there was a lot of angst for folks around, but I can't play for my students and I can't accompany them and I can't play their exercises. And it brought a lot of teachers to I think in many ways a more effective way of teaching, where you're not relying on the piano so much, where you have to be engaged with what's happening with the singer in front of you. You have to use your eyes, ears, and your body, and then your body of information, of course, but you have to use your observation skills in a more intentional way, because you can't hide, right? You can't hide behind the piano. This happens too, I'll say as well. One of the things that happens with folks who are excellent pianists is they'll tend to, and I shouldn't say just with folks who are excellent pianists, you could be any level of pianist, and this can happen to you as well in voice lessons if you're not intentional about it, where like the piano almost becomes a block between you and the singer. So where you're almost hiding behind the piano, right? And in some cases, especially if you're teaching behind and see how I said that? Behind, if you're teaching behind an apartment piano, like an apartment-sized piano, an upright piano or something, where you literally can't see the singer. Like you literally can't see the singer. So that can be a real impediment to great observations in the lesson. So having piano skills is amazing. Do not get me wrong on that. It's fantastic. It's a real bonus to have really terrific piano skills and to be able to play and all that kind of thing. Real bonus. It is also can be problematic. So just keep that in mind. If you are a fabulous pianist and you're teaching, keep in mind that the piano can't be a substitute for you observing. And keep in mind that the piano could get in the way of you observing, right? And also can literally physically get in the way of you observing, where you're sitting behind the piano the whole time and then you're like, oh, wait, I didn't look around to see what was actually happening with that singer's knees. Oh, their knees were locked this entire time. No wonder no wonder their back hurts every time they sing. Huh. What do you know? So, yeah, piano skills. That was definitely a fear of mine. Oh, sorry, friends over there on Instagram. That was definitely a little scary thing in the back of my mind. Although not scary, it was more like, ooh, let's see how we can figure this out. But yeah, something else. Reading my thing here. Teaching young singers, yeah, lots of folks saying I was really scared when I went into independent voice studio teaching, because I had learned, or we've talked about this before, either someone had told me either implicitly or explicitly, and I had learned in some way that teaching young singers was that I had to be really careful because I could really hurt somebody. You know what? You have to be really careful because you could really hurt any singer you work with. Young singers are no different. Any singer you work with, you can really hurt anybody. So you're going to be careful for every singer, not in a scared way, but in a a healthy, cautious way where you're supportive rather than anyway. So teaching young singers, something that someone said they were worried or afraid of teaching CCM or contemporary styles or music theater styles because they had only had training in Western classical styles, and so they were afraid of teaching that. And something that's very interesting, and when they said that, I was like, oh yeah, that is something that people can be nervous about, right, and scared about. But when they said that, I was like, I was not scared about teaching contemporary styles because I thought that I was such a well-trained classical singer that I was going to be able to teach anything. I was going to be amazing at teaching all the styles because I have an undergraduate degree in classical voice and performance, by the way, and also because I'd had so many teachers and I'd studied with some of the best, so clearly I was going to be amazing. I went in with this. True confessions and all of the apologies to the contemporary singers who I taught at the very beginning, who I was teaching to keep space in the back and have an open throat, and then it really have an open throat sensation and really have that fronted lips, and never move your chin up. Never move your chin up while you're singing, because that is really just bad. And so I was teaching that to lots of contemporary singers. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, friends. Those of you who were my beginning students, I'm sorry. Oh. Anyway, yep. Didn't know what I didn't know. I should have been a lot more afraid about teaching that, but I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, right? So the folks if you're coming into teaching now and you're slightly concerned about teaching styles that you have not personally studied, that's a great concern to have. So get some work in with folks who know how to teach that stuff if you've never learned it. Do some work on that. That's a great concern to have. Not knowing what to say. Something that someone else said that I thought was also really smart was, if you're someone who has chronic illnesses, or even someone, if you have migraines, if you get migraines, or, physical illnesses or disabilities that will cause you to, uh, let me say this in the right way, that where the expectations of society and the possibly the expectations of the students who are coming into the studio, know that their expectations may be around, you get a lesson every single week and this is the blah 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 and this is how we do it, right? So there may be these expectations around how consistency and what consistency looks like, and how we teach, how we build attendance, like how attendance is supposed to work and all that kind of thing, right? There are these expectations around that. And so if you're someone who is disabled or has a chronic illness that causes you to not necessarily be able to, or mental health challenges, right? So that can cause you to be someone who isn't necessarily able to show up, and show up is such anyway, who isn't necessarily able to conform to that standard of societal consistency in the studio. You can have a lot of fear around how are you going to be able to deliver in the way that society and everybody expects you to deliver, right? There can be a lot of fear around that. So I thought that was a really interesting one to kind of bring up and just talk about a little bit, because again, as I've said in previous lives and as we've talked about before, you get to start your studio, you get to teach, you get to have a studio the way you want to have it. So set the studio up in the way that you wish it was set up for you, right? Set that thing up in the way that you wish it was set up for you. Figure out the money you need to make. Go talk to Michelle Margaret DeVoe or a coach about how to set up studio for money, and then keep be really clear in your mind about what are the actual things that are important to you. So if you have in your mind that attendance, that you, I'm sorry, I'm going from the teacher perspective. If you have in your mind that you as the teacher must teach every single week, with and be 100% present in the lesson every single hour, every single week, that's fine. And examine where that comes from. That isn't necessarily true. It may be true for some teachers. It may not be true for you as a teacher. You may not actually want to set up your studio whereby you are teaching the same singer at the same time every single week, and if you cancel, you don't get the money, you don't get any money or whatever, right? You may not want to set up the studio that way. That may not be the way that works for you. And if that isn't the way that works for you, say you have migraines regularly, you can't teach with a migraine. I very rarely get migraines. Every once in a while, I get one. Just very rarely. I can like count on one hand the amount I get in a year. And I don't even get like full on migraines, right? I just sort of get this like aura kind of on the way to a migraine. And friends, duh. You can't teach singing with a migraine. You just cannot. You can't do anything with a migraine. Come on, but you can't teach singing with a migraine. Or if you have mental health, where you know that you need to have a certain amount of time off after you've peopled for a while, that's all good. That's not, and that may not even be a mental health thing, right? Like, or if you have I mean, there are so many things. If you have Crohn's, for example, if you have EDS, for example, like, there are so many chronic illnesses and so many chronic conditions that we often consider to be a barrier to being a good teacher, right? That we're afraid are a barrier to being a good teacher. I'm just here to tell you that they're not. They're just not. Being neurodivergent is not a barrier to being a good teacher. It's just not a barrier. It's not. What the barrier comes in when we look at what the societal expectations are around able-bodied and neurotypical, etc. When we look at the societal expectations around that and we think that we have to fit into those, that's where the barrier is, right? The barrier is when we're trying to fit into what society says we should be doing. That's the barrier. So you can find lots of other ways to make studios that work for you in what you need and to make the money that you need to thrive. Like I promise you there are ways to do this. This is not the live to get into that, but I'm just saying to you, if that has been a fear for you, or if that is a continuing fear for you, just know there are ways to do this where you don't have to have that fear. Or where that fear is definitely, that's legitimate, but where you can recognize where it's coming from, right? It's coming from trying to fit into coming up against the barrier that's put there by our societal expectations, rather than, and so when we recognize that, then we can start to say, oh, actually, okay, that's a barrier that doesn't actually need to be in my life. I can actually set up this studio in where we do, I'm going to throw an example out there, where we have flex lessons. You pay a certain amount per month and you get 3 lessons a month, and if I have to shut down a day, then because I can't teach that day, great, then this is where the flex day is to pick that up or whatever. So you can make it, there are options. That's all I'm saying. There are options. Okay. Health, being present, not knowing enough. Oh yeah, so I wanted to come back to the one big one that lots of folks were talking about, which is the kind of like, am I gonna know what to say? Am I going to be able to hear what's happening in the voice? Am I going to be able to do the diagnosing I need to do? Am I going to be able to assign the right exercises? I want to make sure that I'm not hurting anyone, that I'm not causing anyone to stop singing, or to be afraid of singing, or not enjoy singing, etc. Right? So we want to kind of come back to that, like all of the fears that come in around not doing right by our students and not being able to do right. Oh, I forgot to mention one fear. One fear was like dealing with parents, which, yep. Which I think that was like the first one that someone put up, was like dealing with parents. What's your biggest fear about when you first started teaching? Parents. Yep, I hear you. Had some like really intense parents over the years. Had some really intense parents and some just like, woo, amazing parents. I've had everything from everything, right? We all have. So that is a legitimate fear as well. And again, there are things that, one thing that is so useful and that I did not really consider until I had started to work with Michelle Markwick DeVoe over at the Speakeasy Cooperative, but one thing that I hadn't considered, that I hadn't put into place quite as explicitly as she does, but that I had already been working on, but like hadn't really put it into place until I started to work with Michelle. And that is this: if you want to have the easiest, the best time working with parents possible. Nothing helps that process more than having a strong um, policy in place, studio policy, set of studio policies. Nothing helps more than that. And also learning to communicate and, understanding boundaries and all this stuff. But having a really strong set of studio policies, life changer, life changer. And I don't mean having a punitive set of studio policies. Punitive and strong, not the same thing, right? Punitive, not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about having a strong set of studio policies that is based on what you want and how you want your studio to run. That is communicated effectively, and that you can keep turning parents back to, here's the policy, right? So anyway, that's a whole course in and of itself, right? How to set studio policies and boundaries and all that stuff. That's a whole course. Anyway, real quick, because we're getting to the end here, but I wanted to say and go back to something that I have talked about before, which is when you are afraid, or when you find yourself in a teaching situation where you're not sure yet where you're not sure what exercise to assign, you're not sure what you might be hearing, you're not quite able to diagnose what's happening, you're not sure what the next step is for this singer, or what exercise to assign, or maybe even what rep to assign. When you're in that place of not being sure, and this week, even consider this week doing this, come back to the kind of like self-talk, or the assurance for yourself, where you say to yourself, I'm not sure what's next, but I have resources, right? So you not having the resource in the moment is fine. You're allowed to not have the resource in the moment, or to have the knowledge you need, or to have the diagnostic, or to have the information, or to have the exercise, or to have the right rep, etc. You are allowed to not have that in the moment. That is, I mean, if you've been teaching for 25 years and you don't have it in the moment, that sometimes is like, ooh, this is exciting. I don't know exactly what to do here. That's very exciting, right? That's quite exciting. But I know as a, especially as a newer teacher, it can be terrifying to be afraid that you might not know it. But let me just say, you have resources. You have resources now more than at any time in history. Do you have resources? Not only do we have the resources of like all of the texts and books and everything, articles and all those things that, folks had 20 years ago, but as you know, we also have the entire internet. Now, is there a lot of crap out there? Of course there is, of course. But there's the entire internet, and there are some wonderful, trustworthy sites, right? And you have the resources. So that is the thing, I think. Just keep reminding yourself and being grateful for the fact that, oh, and also I wanted to say to beginning teachers, especially if this is a fear, and anyone who may have this fear at some point in this week. Sorry, Instagram. I keep blinking out there because of low batteries. Anyone who might have the fear this week as you're teaching, is if that comes up in yourself, understand that this is something that this fear gets better with time. Like, it really does get better with time, and it really does you start to really trust as you see success, and as you work toward, you will start to trust, and you will start to have fewer and fewer of those terror instances, and way more of like, oh, that's interesting. I'm not actually sure what's going on here. Let me figure that out. Way more of those this is interesting and exciting moments, right? So see what you can do to turn things from like, I'm scared because I'm not sure that I'm serving my student well here, because I don't know a thing, to This is actually really interesting. Here's something, a chance to learn some more stuff, and I have the resources. I have the ability to figure it out. So, and then I'll have one more thing in my toolbox, right? Then I'll have just more stuff in my toolbox. So that's what we want. Eventually, we want to have like lots of stuff in our toolbox. So that's my sort of recap of all of the fears. Not all of them. There were a few like outliers that were super fun and interesting, but like the majority of the fears that came in, especially if people were saying, if there were many people saying something similar. That's my little recap of those with some dialogue around it. And for all of us this week, you have the resources. It's November. How did it get to November? I do not know. But you have the resources. um, or you have access to the resources. So let's see if we can change fear to excitement. Maybe. Possible. Do some reframes. Have a terrific week. I will see you on Friday at noon. Probably. And yeah, I'll see you then. Have a great week. Yep. Oh, I'm a terrible marketer. Here we go. This week on Wednesday, if you want to join me, there's still time to register for the Contemporary Voice POPUP Voice Ped class. So that's on Wednesday. There's still time to register. It's on my website. If you are on my mailing list, you can register and get 10% off as well. So if you're on my mailing list, take a look for that. Yes, where we talk about the anatomy and physiology of contemporary sounds, and especially as compared to all of the things that we have been taught as Western classical singers and in our Western classical training, all of the things that we have been taught around like open throat and how, what all of those things that we've been taught and how that doesn't necessarily jive with contemporary singing. Thanks so much. So great to know I'm not alone. I know. On the keys. I know being a bit shoddy on the keys. I know. I am not a terrific piano player. I'm really not. I can chord with the best of them, but I'm really not a terrific piano player. But yeah, it. There are ways. There are ways around that, and there are some ways to be better at piano playing, like at accompanying, like as a non-professional accompanist. There are ways to be better at that too. There are some folks who teach that. I might just post that as well. There's some folks who teach you how to be better pianists. Okay, take good care. I'm gonna stop this nonsense now. Here we go. Ending, and I'll end the video here too. Take care.